Hi.
It was a late evening when I finally discovered Emily's betrayal. I still remember the moment the truth hit me, like a brick to the chest, suffocating and paralyzing. The quiet, unsuspecting hum of our home was broken by the sudden clash of my own heart, shattered beyond repair. I had suspected something, of course. The little things add up over time. Her late nights at work, the hollow excuses, the distance in her eyes. But I hadn't truly believed it until I saw the evidence with my own eyes. I'd been doing some work in the study when the phone rang. Emily's phone. Without thinking, I picked it up. A text flashed on the screen, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place. I miss you." My blood ran cold. I hadn't even needed to check the sender. The name Chris was enough to send me into a spiral. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that name. Emily had mentioned him, casually, like he was just another colleague. But the intensity of the words in the message made it clear that colleague was a severe understatement. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that text, my mind processing the flood of emotions. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, each feeling rolling over me, hitting me harder than the last. I wasn't angry yet, not fully. I was still in shock. But as the realization hit me, my chest tightened with the weight of it. She had been lying to me for months. The late nights, the secrets. And there I was, sitting in our living room, alone, holding her phone in my trembling hands. The first thing I did was call her. I don't even remember what I said at the time, but I knew the moment she picked up that she was caught off guard. She hesitated. Then came the weak excuse, "It's not what you think, Ethan." She tried to play it off like it was just some innocent mistake, like she hadn't been seeing him behind my back, behind our family's back. But it was over. The veil had been lifted. Her words were just background noise as I sank deeper into my own thoughts. I could feel my anger building, but I wasn't sure where to direct it. I was too numb to scream, too overwhelmed to throw something. I just stood there, dumbfounded. The woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, was having an affair with someone I had never even met. I ended the call, almost without thinking. Her voice lingered in the air like static, but I was already too far gone. I needed something to do. I needed to do something to regain control. That's when I thought of Sophie. Sophie was a friend of mine, someone I'd known for years. She was kind, funny, and easy to talk to. We'd shared a few casual meals together over the years, but nothing more. It had never gone beyond that, and frankly, I never thought it would. Sophie had always seemed like a supportive friend, but recently, something had changed. She'd been more flirtatious than usual, almost as though she was testing the waters, seeing if there was something more between us. When Emily's betrayal hit, I knew Sophie would be the perfect person for this. She was attractive, smart, and above all, available. I didn't even need to think twice. I called her immediately. "Hey, Sophie," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You busy tonight?" "Nope." "What's up?" she responded, sounding surprised but intrigued. "I need some company." "Dinner. Just the two of us." "Sounds good to me," Sophie replied with a casual laugh. "Let me know where." I told her the restaurant. A quiet little place by the water that I knew was intimate but not overly familiar. There was something cold about it, something that fit the mood I was in. It was perfect. As I drove there, the anger that had been simmering inside me for hours finally began to boil over. Emily's betrayal was too much to ignore. I couldn't just go home and act like everything was fine. I had to show her that I wasn't the man she thought I was. I wasn't just some pushover, some fool she could use and discard. I was going to make her feel the weight of her decisions, even if it was just for one night. When I met Sophie at the restaurant, I was a mix of emotions. Part anger, part satisfaction, and something else I couldn't quite name. Seeing Sophie smile, dressed in that tight red dress, did something to me. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge yet, but there was a feeling, like I was reclaiming something. The power was shifting. The roles were being reversed. Sophie immediately noticed the tension in my face, the way I clenched my jaw. She asked what was wrong, but I didn't tell her anything. Not yet. Instead, I leaned in, my voice lowering to a whisper. "I just found out my wife is cheating on me," I said, the words tasting bitter as I said them out loud. "With someone I know." Someone I work with? Sophie's expression changed, though she hid it well. That's rough, she said, taking a sip of her wine. What are you going to do? I let the silence hang between us for a while. My hands were shaking slightly, and I wasn't sure if it was the anger or the realization that Emily had been right under my nose this whole time. I didn't want to answer Sophie's question just yet. The thing was, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Revenge? Yes, it was part of it. But what did that really mean? What was I hoping to accomplish by sitting here with Sophie tonight? The waiter came to take our orders, and I ordered a steak. Sophie opted for the salmon, her usual. But the whole time, my mind was elsewhere. The table was set for two, but I felt like I was alone, separated by my own thoughts. Every time I glanced across the table at Sophie, her flirtatious smile, the way she ran her fingers through her hair, I felt something. It was subtle at first, maybe just the comfort of someone else's attention, but it started to make me question everything. Was this what I really wanted? To make Emily feel the same pain I was feeling? Was I just trying to get back at her for something that wasn't really her fault? We ate in silence for a while, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Sophie spoke again. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to confront her? The question hit me like a slap to the face. It felt too real, too direct. And it made me realize something I hadn't fully confronted yet. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't sure why I'd asked Sophie to dinner. I wasn't sure if I wanted her, if I was even capable of moving on, of doing something so reckless. But as I sat there, looking into Sophie's eyes, it was hard to deny that a part of me wanted to act out, wanted to hurt Emily the way I had been hurt. But the truth was, I didn't know if it would even make a difference. As the evening wore on, Sophie leaned in closer, sensing that I wasn't really present. Her hand brushed mine, and the touch was electric, a reminder of the distance I had created with Emily. The way Sophie looked at me, as though I was her whole world in that moment, was intoxicating. I didn't have the answers. I didn't have any plan for what came next. But in that fleeting moment, with Sophie by my side, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, alive, in control, and free from the weight of betrayal. But as I drove home that night, the guilt began to set in. What had I really accomplished? I wasn't sure if I'd ever find the answer, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about me, and what I was willing to do to heal. The night had already felt strange in ways I couldn't quite put into words. Sitting there across from Sophie, the heavy weight of my emotions was starting to catch up with me. Sophie, with her knowing smiles and confident laugh, had kept the evening light, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in my chest. It wasn't guilt, exactly, but something close to it, something that felt like I was betraying myself, even if Emily had done the same. I had convinced myself it was all part of some twisted game, but now, as I sipped my wine and tried to keep the conversation flowing, I realized I didn't even know what the endgame was anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I had been ignoring everything that had to do with Emily tonight. For once, I wanted to let my mind be free of her, even if it meant sitting across from another woman, pretending I was just enjoying a casual dinner. But I was too far gone to fool myself. The emotional chaos from earlier still simmered beneath the surface, always there, always just out of reach. Then, just as the waiter was bringing dessert, everything changed. I saw her before she saw me. Emily was standing at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for someone, or something. The moment her gaze landed on us, my stomach twisted. She froze. For the briefest second, I could see her shoulders stiffen, her lips part in disbelief. And then she walked toward us, her heels clicking on the floor, each step a drumbeat that grew louder in my ears. I had no time to process it, no time to react. My heart was pounding in my chest as she reached our table. Sophie had already caught sight of Emily, and she was looking at her with a strange mixture of surprise and curiosity. Emily didn't acknowledge Sophie, didn't even glance at her for a moment. She was focused entirely on me. "Are you seriously doing this?" Emily's voice cut through the air like a blade. The table between us suddenly felt like a wall, a boundary I couldn't cross. There was no warmth in her tone, no softness. Only accusation. And there, standing in front of me, she was a picture of fury, eyes wide, face flushed, her chest rising and falling rapidly as if she was struggling to keep it together. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wasn't ready for this. Not now, not like this. Everything I'd been trying to bury inside me, the anger, the hurt, the confusion, now it was all rushing to the surface. I wasn't prepared for her to show up, especially not in the middle of the night, in a place like this, as if she had known all along. As if she had been watching, waiting for the moment to strike. Sophie looked between us, clearly unsure of what to do, but I could feel the tension in the air, thickening with every passing second. Emily's gaze locked onto mine, and she took a step closer to the table, practically shaking with rage. "Is this how it is now, Ethan?" she spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're going to replace me with her? Just like that?" She waved a hand toward Sophie, who was still sitting frozen in place, eyes wide, not knowing whether to speak up or stay silent. I didn't know how to respond. The words I had rehearsed in my head all evening, things I had imagined saying in this exact moment, suddenly felt useless. The part of me that had wanted to hurt her, to show her that I wasn't going to stand idly by and let her walk all over me, it all felt so small now. I had wanted revenge, but seeing her in front of me, so vulnerable, so raw, it didn't feel as satisfying as I had imagined. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like I was unraveling in front of her, and she was doing the same. Sophie, to her credit, didn't say anything at first. She just glanced at me with a question in her eyes, but I wasn't sure what to tell her. Emily was still standing there, waiting for me to say something, anything that would make this right, or at least make it clearer. But nothing came. I couldn't find the words. "I trusted you," Emily said, her voice quieter now, almost broken. Her eyes were glistening with something that might have been tears, but I couldn't be sure. "I trusted you, Ethan, and this is how you repay me?" Her chest was heaving with the weight of what she was feeling, and I could see it, could see how much it hurt her to be in this moment. As much as I hated to admit it, I understood. I understood her pain. She wasn't just angry. She was devastated. And I had done that. I couldn't even look at her. I felt my face flush, but it wasn't with the same kind of anger that had consumed me earlier. Now it was shame. A deep, gut-wrenching shame that made me want to crawl under the table and disappear. She wasn't just a wife who had betrayed me. She was someone I had loved. Someone who had been my partner, my everything. And here I was, playing some twisted game with Sophie, trying to make her feel what I was feeling, and the irony hit me like a punch. What had I hoped for? What was I trying to prove? Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, cutting me like a jagged knife. "You're no better than me," she said, her tone suddenly cold again. "You think this makes you the victim? Look at yourself. You think you can just make it all go away by sitting here with her?" She gestured towards Sophie, who still hadn't said a word. "You think you can just replace me like I was nothing?" I opened my mouth, trying to defend myself, trying to explain. I wanted to say it was about revenge. That I was doing this to hurt her, to make her feel what I felt when I found out about Chris. But when I opened my mouth, the words didn't come out. All I could do was stare at her, at the woman I had built my life with, standing there, broken, before me. Sophie, who had remained silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "Look, I'm not trying to get in the middle of this," she said gently, though her voice carried a note of tension. "Maybe it's time to take a step back?" But Emily wasn't having it. She turned on Sophie, her eyes narrowing with venom. "Oh, don't you dare," she snapped. "You think I don't know what's going on here? You think you can just walk in and steal my life away from me? How dare you?" Her voice wavered, but there was no mistaking the fury behind her words. Sophie stood up then, raising her hands in surrender. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm just here. But you need to talk to your husband, not me." For a moment, Emily looked at her like she might say something else, but then her gaze turned back to me, piercing, filled with all the anger and hurt she couldn't keep in anymore. "I never wanted this, Ethan. I never wanted to destroy us. But you've pushed me to a point where I have nothing left. And that was it. That was the moment when everything I had tried to bury and forget, exploded. because deep down I knew she was right. I had pushed her. I had played my part in destroying us too. But I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Not tonight. The tension in the air thickened, every word that passed between Emily and me a new stab to the chest. She was shaking now, her hands clenched into fists at her sides as if she could physically hold herself together, as if she could somehow stop the flood of emotions that had broken loose between us. I could barely process anything she was saying, her voice a blur of anger and hurt. But I was too paralyzed by my own guilt, my own shame, to say anything back that might make sense. It was like standing in the middle of a storm that I had created, and now there was no escape from it. Sophie, ever the mediator, was standing between us, her hand gently reaching for Emily's arm, trying to calm her down, but Emily wasn't having it. Her eyes, wild with emotion, snapped to Sophie's hand, and she jerked away from her touch. I saw the rage building in Emily, the kind that comes with the feeling of being trapped, betrayed in front of a room full of strangers. "I don't need your pity," Emily yelled, her voice echoing across the room, causing other diners to glance over. The restaurant, once a quiet, intimate place, suddenly felt like a theater. And Emily was center stage, her breakdown unfolding in front of everyone. The eyes of the patrons turned toward us, some of them whispering, others with phones already out, recording the whole scene. It was like the whole world was watching. My stomach dropped as the reality of it hit me. This was happening. In front of everyone. What had started as a personal confrontation, a painful moment of raw emotion, had now become public spectacle. I tried to speak, to apologize, to explain myself, but the words caught in my throat. There was no reason that could fix this. No excuse that would take away the embarrassment, the shame of what was happening in that moment. Emily's eyes were locked on me, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, and I couldn't look away, couldn't stop the feeling that we were both drowning, sinking in this mess together. "You think you can just walk away from this, Ethan?" she yelled again, her voice rising to a pitch that made everyone in the restaurant fall silent. "You think you can humiliate me like this and just go on with your life like everything's fine?" Her voice cracked at the end of the sentence, and it felt like the entire room held its breath, waiting for the next outburst. Sophie was still standing there, frozen, unsure of how to navigate this. Her eyes flicked between me and Emily, but she didn't say anything. She could see it now, too, the destruction unfolding in front of her. I could feel the weight of the entire restaurant on my shoulders, the stares of strangers boring into my back, their eyes filled with judgment. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter clicking. My eyes flicked toward a table in the corner where a man was holding up his phone, the screen angled directly toward us. My stomach twisted with panic. The realization hit me with a gut punch. This wasn't going to be a quiet argument anymore. This wasn't going to be something we could just walk away from. The man's phone was recording. He wasn't the only one. People around the restaurant were pulling out their phones, some in disbelief, some with pitying expressions, others clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before them. I could see the flashing red light on their devices, their attempts to capture every moment of Emily's breakdown. Emily's face turned red with anger as she saw the cameras, and she snapped her head toward the man in the corner. "Are you serious?" she screamed. "You think this is funny?" But it didn't matter. It was already too late. The phones were rolling, the video was being recorded, and the audience was growing larger with every second. I saw a woman at the table next to ours whisper something to her friend, both of them sneaking glances at the phone in her hand. A man at the bar was grinning, clearly enjoying the spectacle. The room was alive with whispered comments, the whole place suddenly charged with the kind of energy I'd never wanted. It felt like being trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't wake up. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps now, and her voice was laced with hysteria. "You humiliated me, Ethan. You humiliated me," she screamed, her chest heaving with each word. She was barely holding it together, and I was too stunned to do anything to stop it. All I could do was watch as she fell apart in front of a room full of strangers, my own shame doubling as I realized how much damage had been done, how much more I had hurt her. "Please, Emily, let's just talk," I said, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. But it was no use. Emily wasn't listening anymore. The only thing she seemed to care about now was the public spectacle, the humiliation. She turned to Sophie once more, her voice rising with a venomous edge. "And you think you can just swoop in and take my place?" she snapped at Sophie, who remained silent, eyes wide with disbelief. "You think you can just pretend like this is okay?" Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but before she could get a word out, Emily swung her gaze back to me, her face now twisted with rage. "You're both disgusting," she hissed, her words sharp and filled with contempt. "You think this is funny? That you can just walk away from me like this?" I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, constricted, like there was a lump lodged in it that I couldn't swallow. Everything I had hoped to control, the revenge, the payback, had turned into a farce. The phones were still recording, the cameras still focused on us. People were laughing now, not in sympathy, but in amusement. They were enjoying watching the train wreck, and I felt like I was part of it, as if I was the one responsible for setting the whole thing in motion. One of the patrons, an older man, chuckled under his breath, and that sound, the light laughter, was enough to break me. It hit me like a punch. This wasn't just some personal drama anymore. This was public. This was out there for anyone to see. Emily wasn't just hurt, she was humiliated. We were both humiliated. And the whole world was watching us unravel. Emily's face crumpled at that, her hands going to her head, as though she couldn't bear the weight of it all. "This is all your fault, Ethan. You did this to me," she cried, her voice cracking as she took a step back, looking like she might collapse. The tears were welling in her eyes now, the floodgates opening, but no one was coming to her rescue. The crowd around us just kept watching, some recording, some whispering, all of them feeding off the drama like vultures. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't stand the thought of everyone knowing the depths of our misery, seeing Emily break down like that. The woman who had once been my whole life, the one I had loved, was reduced to a public spectacle because of the mess I had created. And worse, because of my own selfish need for revenge. The video was already circulating, I could feel it. Every click, every new viewer was another nail in the coffin. The truth was out. It was no longer just a betrayal between two people. It was now a public scandal. And as Emily turned and stormed out of the restaurant, her sobs echoing behind her, I was left to deal with the consequences, alone, ashamed, and exposed. The fallout came fast and hard, like a wave crashing over Emily, dragging everything in its path. It wasn't just the scandal at the restaurant that ruined her, it was everything that came after. The video, of course, went viral. No matter how much she tried to bury it, to pretend it didn't exist, it was out there, on every screen, shared across every social media platform. The laughter, the whispers, the cruel comments, they followed her everywhere. At first, she tried to act like it didn't matter. She showed up to work the next day, holding her head high, pretending like she wasn't completely broken inside. But the stares were unbearable. Her colleagues barely made eye contact, their voices low as they whispered behind her back. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. The office chatter was relentless. People who once respected her now looked at her with disdain. By the end of the week, she was called into HR. The conversation was brief, but it didn't need to be long. The company couldn't afford the bad press. Emily was given the option to resign or face termination. She chose the former, her shoulders slumped as she walked out of the building for the last time. I wasn't there to witness it, but I can imagine how it went. How she stood at the door of her office, surrounded by the mess she had worked so hard to build, now slipping through her fingers like sand. As the days passed, Emily's world continued to crumble. She tried to reach out to her friends, but most of them had already distanced themselves, unwilling to get caught up in the mess. Those who had once celebrated her, who had been her closest confidants, now avoided her calls or gave vague, apologetic excuses for why they couldn't meet up. Emily, who had once been the center of every social gathering, now found herself alone. The phone calls stopped. The messages ceased. It was as though everyone had turned their backs on her at once. I watched it all from a distance, feeling strangely detached. I wasn't happy about what was happening to her, but I didn't care either. The anger that had consumed me before, when I first discovered her affair, had faded into something else. I was numb, almost indifferent. Part of me still remembered the woman I had loved, but another part of me saw the whole situation as her own doing. She had shattered us. I didn't need to keep picking at the wounds. One afternoon, weeks after the viral video had made its rounds, I saw Emily sitting alone in a cafe through the window. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt. She was staring into her coffee, her hands wrapped around the cup as if it were the only thing holding her together. I felt a flicker of something, a pang of guilt, maybe, or pity, but I turned away before I could stop myself. It didn't matter anymore. Emily's life was falling apart, and I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces. What I had once thought would feel like victory, her seeing me with Sophie, the public humiliation, the revenge, had turned out to be hollow. It didn't feel like justice. It didn't feel like anything. It was just the end of something. An ending I couldn't undo, no matter how much I might want to. But the truth was, I was beyond caring now. Emily's life had become a spectacle. Her reputation, ruined. Her career, her friends, disappeared. The woman who had once been so sure of herself was now just a shadow of what she had been, swallowed up by the consequences of her own actions. She was left alone to deal with the wreckage, and I was left watching from the sidelines, trying to figure out how to live with the fallout of it all. In the weeks after Emily's life had unraveled, I found myself slipping into something new. It wasn't a fresh start exactly, but it felt like a shift, a subtle change in the way I approached life. Sophie had become a more constant presence, a steady companion in the midst of everything. I hadn't expected it to happen, not like this. At first, it had just been a way to get back at Emily, a temporary distraction from the chaos of the past. But as the days passed, something deeper grew between Sophie and me. It wasn't like what I had with Emily, nothing could ever replace that. But Sophie was different. There was something comforting about her presence. She didn't push me to talk about the mess with Emily if I didn't want to. She didn't ask me for answers to questions I didn't have. She let me be. And that, in itself, was a relief. The pressure that had weighed on me for so long, the anger, the guilt, it started to lift little by little. I didn't need to hide anything with Sophie. There were no expectations, no demands, no strings attached. What we had was simple, if nothing else. We would meet for lunch during the week, grab a drink after work, sometimes just sit together in silence, letting the hours pass without a need to fill them with words. She wasn't Emily, but in a way, that was the point. Sophie gave me space to breathe, to rebuild, to figure out what I wanted from the mess I'd left behind. We found ourselves spending more and more time together, and with each moment, I felt myself getting more comfortable. Sophie never pressed me to define anything, but I could tell she was happy to be there with me, content in the way things were. There was a warmth between us that was growing, something real, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close to it. And in the silence between us, there was peace. One night, after dinner, Sophie took my hand as we walked along the waterfront. The city lights reflected off the water, and the cool breeze from the river felt refreshing after the heat of the day. She looked up at me, her eyes soft but searching, as if she wanted to ask something but wasn't sure how. "You're different now," she said quietly, her fingers tightening around mine. I looked at her, unsure how to answer. I didn't feel different, not in any specific way, but I knew I wasn't the same man I had been when I first met her. The bitterness had faded. The anger had burned out, leaving behind something more peaceful, more grounded. Maybe it was the time I'd taken to process everything, or maybe it was simply her presence that helped me find my footing again. Whatever it was, it felt right. "I don't know if it's better," I replied, squeezing her hand. "But it's something. It feels like I'm finally figuring things out." She smiled at that, the kind of smile that made me feel like I wasn't as broken as I had once believed. There was no judgment in her eyes, no pity, just understanding. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about moving forward, finding something new to care about. Over the next few months, we grew closer. We spent weekends exploring new spots around the city, trying different restaurants, going to museums, or just taking long walks when the weather was good. There were no grand declarations or promises made, but in the simplicity of it all, I found something I had been missing for years: comfort. Sophie never asked for more than I could give, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't perfect, but nothing ever is. We both had our scars, mine from the betrayal, hers from her own past, but we found ways to support each other through it. Sophie had a quiet strength that I admired. She didn't need me to save her, but somehow, we ended up saving each other in small, quiet ways. One evening, after a quiet dinner at her apartment, she looked at me across the table, her gaze soft. "Do you think we can just move on?" she asked, almost hesitantly. I took a deep breath, setting my fork down. "I don't know if it's about moving on," I said. "It's more about finding a way forward. A new kind of life. One that makes sense for us now." She nodded, and there was an unspoken understanding between us. There was no need to rush anything. We had time. The mess with Emily, the pain of the past, it all felt distant now, like a shadow I could barely remember. And as Sophie smiled at me, I realized that the future didn't have to be a continuation of the past. It could be something entirely new, something better, even. In her, I found a new purpose, a reason to move forward without the weight of guilt or resentment. I wasn't looking to replace what I had with Emily, but I was learning to live again. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning.
Bye.